Hi, I'm Dani Castellano, and this is Diet Culture. In today's episode, I was able to interview Cherie Miller, LPC. Cherie has a master's in counseling and is a licensed professional counselor. She is owner of Food Freedom Therapy, which offers therapy, coaching, and group programs to help people make peace with food and their bodies. Before starting Food Freedom Therapy, Cherie worked in a higher level of care at 2 different eating disorder hospitals. She has 15 years of experience as an eating disorder mentor, speaker, educator, and advocate. She is also a member of the International Association of Eating Disorders Professionals Foundation and the Association for Size Diversity in Health. In today's episode, Cherie and I chatted about the science behind HAES and intuitive eating, finding support when you feel alone in healing relationship with food, why healthcare providers may decline supporting weight loss, how privilege affects appearance, how to talk to kids about bodies being different and encouraging inclusivity, oppression of larger bodies, diet culture filter laid over Christianity, and much more. I think you're really going to love today's episode and can't wait for you to hear it. Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm excited to get to meet you in person. We've been chatting a little bit over Instagram, and this is so lovely.
Yes.
So I'm going to dive right in. In this space, I'm always so curious how people got into this realm because there's so much else that you can do with dietetics and with therapy and just in general as a healthcare professional. And I just love hearing these stories.
Yeah. Well, and actually I had like a whole nother career before I had this. So it is interesting, although I always knew I wanted to do therapy. So it was nice to finally get to a place in life where I could do that. But
okay.
Really the main thing is that I'm recovered from an eating disorder myself. And so I knew, gosh, I remember journaling when I was starting recovery, like I want this to be good somehow, someday, for there to be value in everything that I'm going through. And I didn't know at the time what that would look like, but here I am. And that was a really tough thing to go through, but I'm very thankful in the sense that it led to this passion that I have and the work that I do now. So
yeah, that's so beautiful. I feel like that is a really common story for people who are super passionate in this realm. I also struggled with my own eating disorder in the middle of my education to become a dietitian. So I definitely, once I got to this point of doing this work, was very thankful in a sense for that personal experience because it just gives you such a different lens for helping people when you can understand at a different level what it is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when I worked at higher levels of care, I have rarely met people who are themselves recovered. And that's always so interesting to me. Like, why would you gravitate towards this work? Because it, especially when you get to that level where, people are pretty acute, it's like, that's challenging work. I'm like, why would you do this unless you've gone through it or passionate about it? And sometimes I think people are just, it was a job.
Yeah.
People, it's like they've loved somebody that's gone through it.
I've definitely heard that version
of having somebody in their life that they cared about that went through it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think too, a lot of people in this realm tend to have just had other life experiences where they took care of people in some capacity. And so it kind of leads you to that, which I guess is a good and bad thing, depending on how you look at that.
Totally. Yeah. So, yes, I don't think you have to work with somebody that's recovered for them to do a good job. But I do think, in my experience, clients tend to feel maybe a little bit more comfortable just because they know, even though our stories are never exactly the same, everybody's journey is unique. I have some level of understanding, and I certainly don't have any judgment. And I think that's important when you're doing coaching or therapy with somebody to know that that's a really safe relationship where you're not going to be judged at all.
Yeah, 100%. Because I think the shame that comes along with having an eating disorder or any kind of disordered eating can really keep you quiet for such a long time. So to connect with a person that you can feel safe with is essential.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's so much shame.
Yeah. I really love the things that you share on your Instagram page. Like that's obviously how we connected. And I just think you have such a kind and empathetic and informative voice. How long have you been like doing that aspect of things, like with social media and your passions?
Not very long.
Okay.
Just about a year. I just passed. It was like at the end of March. I passed being on Instagram for a year, and other people might have heard me tell the story before, but it's kind of funny because I really kind of fought the whole idea because I was like, oh my gosh, I do not want to even deal with it. I don't care about Instagram. One more thing, what different, but I really was like, okay, I probably should, just because that's where people tend to be. When I was working at a higher level of care, I was working with one of the teen groups, and I was informed that Facebook is for old people.
Oh my gosh.
So I was like, oh, okay. Well, I mean, if the shoe fits, I am getting old, I guess. But just realizing like there was this whole nother world that I wasn't a part of that maybe I should check out. So I'm really grateful I did, because it's not been at all what I expected. My only concept of social media was Facebook, where you really just connect with people that you already kind of know.
Yeah.
And so it's just been so wonderful how this has expanded my whole network of people in this space, and just like getting to meet people like you. And it's been a real blessing. And I'm so thankful that I took the plunge, even though I didn't want to.
Yeah, I'm glad that you did too, because that's how, like, to get connected with anyone that's outside of your immediate circle. I feel like Instagram has been so instrumental in that. I'm really thankful for it as well.
Yeah. And I think for this kind of work, and for people who are looking to recover or to work on their body image stuff, that can be so helpful. I mean, it can be really dangerous too, depending on what you're filling your feed with. But I feel like, right. I feel like if you're really intentional about filling your feed with positive messages related to intuitive eating and recovery and body image, it can be so, so helpful, because the truth is this whole diet culture thing it's really prominent. And it really depends on your own circle, but for so many people, they don't really have anybody in their friends or family circles who are encouraging these kinds of food freedom,
Yeah.
acceptance type messages, and so to get that community online, it's just really invaluable.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That sparks a question for me. I'm curious because I really want to pick your brain a lot, just because you are on the therapy end of things, and it's so nice for a dietitian to get to talk with a therapist. That's why I love my higher level of care job, because I can be like, hey, like, this is what I'm seeing, what's actually going on here. But when I was doing outpatient work before I moved to this job, a big thing that seemed so difficult for my patients was the fact that they didn't have anyone outside of their treatment team that seemed to understand what they were going through. And I was just curious how you would speak to that for someone. I'm sure it's, a little bit personalized, but how to cope with that when you feel that isolation outside of your treatment team.
Yeah, that is really hard. Just our human nature. Like, we don't want to feel alone. We don't want to feel different. And it can really make us question, like, are we crazy? Are we doing the right thing?
Yeah.
Am I like totally off the rails here? So kind of what I was saying as far as finding community online, and there is Instagram, but obviously if you're not huge into Instagram, or if you're also on other platforms, like I'm not on TikTok, but I know that's huge right now. And again, you have to be really careful, because there's a lot of stuff out there that could be very triggering and not helpful in recovery. Even people that are claiming to be intuitive eating, it's kind of buzzword right now, and it's catchy and trendy. And so I just came across an account the other day that she says in her bio, she's against diet. How does she define herself? A diet culture critic. And then she posted this thing that was incredibly diet culture. And I was like, what is this? That's incredibly insincere. And she probably wasn't meaning to be that way.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, but I'm like, man, that's really harmful to people that follow that account thinking they're going to get one thing, and then they get something else that might be actually pretty triggering. So being careful on that. But there are Facebook communities as well. There are groups on Facebook that you can join. And I think just surrounding yourself with that message as much as possible. There's so many good podcasts like this one. There's really good books now. That was so helpful for me, is just kind of immersing myself in all of that. And just, I know not everybody's a reader or likes to listen to podcasts, whatever avenue that you like and enjoy. I think we just have to fill our minds with all of that stuff to kind of counteract what we're hearing from everywhere else. The other thing I would say that could be really important is putting in some boundaries, and that can be really difficult, very uncomfortable. I find, especially for people with eating disorder temperaments. We're people pleasers. We don't like to upset people and all of that kind of thing. So boundaries can be really difficult. But putting in some boundaries and being able to say, like, this is not helpful for me. Can we not talk about this particular thing? And I've had some clients that I kind of jokingly say that, like, you're becoming like an intuitive eating prophet, because it's like their message, depending on their personality and comfort level. But sometimes they're like making a real difference in their circle as far as introducing all this stuff. And sometimes, people are not open to that, but sometimes they are. I have one client in particular. It's like so great. I love listening to her talk about, she's like, and I gave my sister the anti-diet book, and I think my mom's going to read it. And it's like, that's so great. So, I think depending on your friends and family, there might be opportunity to make some changes and plant some seeds.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think it's a helpful reminder for people to hear, no matter where you are on that spectrum, whether you have a full-blown eating disorder or you're just kind of the average dabbler in diet culture, trying to lose weight, wherever you are, I think it's a good reminder that if you're trying to break out of that, you're going to have to advocate and find other places to surround yourself. Because I feel even it gets stronger every year you go. I have not been in this field for as long as you have. So you can probably relate to this, to your earlier years of this, but sometimes I would come across something that would be kind of shaking my ground. I'm like, oh wait, am I actually doing the right thing to help people? Because I'm seeing this and it's like, oh, maybe I do really need to help people lose weight for them to be healthy and happy. And it just would be disturbing to me how I know that this is 100% BS, but sometimes if it's worded in the right way, people can be so convincing that even a newer professional getting into intuitive eating and breaking free from all that can be shaken.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the diet culture messages are so loud and so prominent, and we're getting it from every aspect. I mean, there's the social aspect. We hear it in the media. They've made an epidemic out of a certain body size. So we're hearing this from the medical community. And so it's everywhere. And that's, again, where it's like human nature. If that's what we're hearing most of the time,
yeah,
to make us stop and question. And that's only natural. And so that's the other thing. I feel like getting really rooted in the science of it was really cool for me, and doing a lot of reading with the Health at Every Size book, the Body Respect book, listening to a lot of the podcasts that talked about things from a very empirical, research-based standpoint. Mm-hmm. So this isn't this is just a touchy-feely, let's all just accept each other and, be happy kind of, warm, fuzzy movement. There's actually a lot of science behind this Health at Every Size movement. And you almost get kind of upset once you realize that, because it's like, wow, we've really been sold a bill of goods that is actually really not correct scientifically, and it's really harmful.
Yeah, very much so. The first time that I came across some of the literature that backs this up, I was so grateful, because I feel like a lot of people do believe that. They're like, oh, you're just trying to make people feel better, which inherently is not a negative thing.
Right.
But to find out that there is science behind the weight stigma, science like that, and some of the intuitive eating, meta-analyses, that they just keep doing research and finding that this is helpful. And it's like, oh, thank goodness, because if you want to argue about making people feel better about themselves, whatever, but you can't argue that and science in combination.
Yes, exactly. And, doing what I do, I am called to practice from an evidence-based standpoint, which is why now I'm pretty upfront with clients that we can work together, but if you're wanting me to help you try to lose weight, I ethically feel like I can't do that. Like, I support your body autonomy. You do what you need to do. But as far as like what you're wanting from me, if you're wanting support in that, I can't do it because I feel like it's not evidence-based. Like, we really don't have any evidence scientifically that there is a good method for losing weight, in a healthy way. I can do my quotations.
Yes.
Like a quote unquote healthy way, long term. So I feel like it's incredibly irresponsible of me to encourage that in clients. And so it's not really like, again, I don't judge clients if that's where they're at and they're still believe me, I understand given our culture and how we treat people in larger bodies and the thin privilege and all of that. I totally understand it. But at the same time, again, I feel professionally like, I don't think I wouldn't feel good about that ethically supporting that. So usually I'm like, okay, can we put that aside and talk about other goals? Or maybe I'm not the right fit for you and we can do something else.
Yeah, that's how I felt a lot too. So I was working in private practice for the first 3 years of my like becoming a registered dietitian. And unfortunately, like if someone came in and wanted to work on weight loss with me, I had to support that because it wasn't my own individual practice. So I couldn't, I mean, I did get pretty like aggressive towards the end of my time there with being like, just so you know, like we don't have as much control over this as, we think we do. And I don't actually agree with a lot of these methods, but like I get that you came here to work with a professional, but I started to like really push back on it. And occasionally people were like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But it was kind of that thing where I felt like they were taking it like a wink, wink. Like it was like, oh, we're going to focus on these other things, but I'm still going to lose weight, right? Because that's why I'm here. And because of the like marketing and advertising of that particular practice, like I kind of ended up being very stuck. And I was seeing probably like a quarter of my caseload were eating disorders by that time. And I was working with an IADEP supervisor. Like, so to have people come in, it was always this like, oh my gosh, what am I going to get next? Because if I have to like talk with one more person about weight loss, like I was losing sleep at night. It was just becoming so overwhelming because I didn't believe in it, like personally, or we don't have the science to support it. And then people are going to gain the weight back and think that they failed and it's it's not them. And so that's why I just like dove straight into the eating disorder realm, because I was like, I literally can't come in contact with one more person that's asking me to help them lose weight. Like I gotta go.
Well, good for you. I know that's a hard place to be. And I always feel this discomfort. Maybe that's the people pleaser in me that I'm still working through. But it's like, I don't want clients to feel like I don't support them or I don't understand or, and when I was first kind of figuring out how to navigate this, I didn't do it perfectly every time. Lo and behold, I'm a human being. And there were sometimes like in my intake sessions with clients, I would try to explain like, I don't do that kind of work. And I actually had one lady tell me she felt very judged. And I was so heartbroken because I was like, no. Because I kept saying like, if you want to work with me. And she said she felt like I was rejecting her. And I was like, no, I just want to be like super upfront that it seems like that's your goal. And that's not the work that I do. And I want you to know, like, you don't have to work with me. Like, you can go find somebody else if that's really what you want. And so I was coming at it from like, you absolutely can go find somebody else. She took it as like, I don't want to work with you. So, it's a process of like figuring out how to communicate that in a way that clients hopefully don't feel judged or rejected. And yet at the same time, like I'm authentic and true to myself and feel like I'm acting ethically and, I'm a very forthright person anyway. That's my style. And so I like to be just really upfront with people. And also I like to kind of plant the seed that, there's a different possibility here, and I think for some people, that's the first time they've ever heard about like, oh, I can be healthy and I might not lose weight. Like, you know what I mean? So I feel like there's value in kind of putting it out there that like, hey, you may choose not to go this route,
Right.
but there is this route that you might not even be aware of.
Yeah, I agree. That was like my one thing that I could tell myself, like, at least I'm not selling myself out. I am giving them this information and it's their choice, ultimately their body, their decisions. And I totally feel the same way. Like, I'm not judging my like anyone for wanting to. Like you said, this diet culture world we live in tells you that you need to be as thin as possible. Like, of course people are going to want to. And then we have the health layer. I think for me, it comes down to like, I have a lot of people I love and care about in my life who have been battling weight loss journeys, up and down, weight cycling, following diets. And I watch them and how like much pain they're in. And when I first became a dietitian, it was like, oh, let me give you some of this advice because I want to help you. And now it's kind of gotten to the point where I don't make any comments about body size. Like, I refuse to engage in that conversation. And it's hard sometimes because I know that these people I care about are just trying to be their best selves, but I see it so differently. Like, I don't care if they ever lose a pound again, ever. Like, that doesn't increase their value to me, but I know they think that it increases their value. And I can't speak to that, right? Because I'm not them, I'm not in their body, but it's so hard to like when you have that in your personal life too. And I feel like when I was working with people in an outpatient setting, it was the same thing. Like, I don't want this life for you anymore. It's not that I'm judging you. It's that I want you to find some acceptance and like be able to think about something other than how many calories you ate yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. It's hard to watch people go through this. And, something you said kind of sparked this idea that for me, that's like, you pretty much nailed it on the head. It's like diet culture sells this idea that our best selves is always a thinner self. And it's really hard to watch people still be kind of trapped up in that. And because I do know how much pain it causes, I see it in the work that I do. I remember being there. And that's where it's like, yeah, I don't want that for people.
Yeah.
At the same time, like, I recognize this is definitely a journey. Like, I did not get to where I'm at now with my relationship with food and my body, I was gonna say overnight, but like not even over a matter of days, weeks, or months. It's really been several years or longer where I've been working to get to this place. And so, I mean, I've definitely gone from hearing the health at every size stuff from that first moment thinking, what a bunch of hogwash. This is crazy. Everybody knows being fat is bad for you, to being like, okay, but I was open-minded enough at the time to see like, okay, what's this all about? I'm willing to like listen to some podcasts, read the book, and see. And then I ended up being blown away. Again, going back to how much science was actually there. And so it's a process, and I can do that too with clients, that we can't really rush that, and sometimes they're the ones that want to rush it, because it's hard to be in that place, or I'm wanting to rush it because I so want them to not be, to be suffering. I mean, I know that sounds dramatic, but really, truly, there's a lot of suffering that comes with not just eating disorders, but that chronic dieting, that yo-yo cycle that you were talking about, and just having your identity and your worth wrapped up in your appearance is a painful way to live.
It is. And I think too, like, people can get very defensive about it because they don't want to admit that it is such a difficult thing. And they're like, oh no, I don't care about that. It's not about that. It's about health, or it's about this. And I just find that very curious. Like, what is that poking at that makes you feel so defensive over it? Because I think I don't like, it always is. There's always something very much underlying, no matter how like strong or confident you are. I think that there is like a piece of it because that's what society has told us. And that's where, like, when you said suffering might sound like kind of dramatic, but I don't think that that's dramatic, because I remember those days of like walking around and just like being so hyper aware of my body that feeling like my fat move in any way made me just like, it was this reinforcer of like, I'm not good enough. Like I can't be like this. I shouldn't eat anymore. I need to go purge. And it's like, I know not everyone is going to have that if you're not predisposed to an eating disorder, but I just think there's so much of that layer. Like it is suffering. Diet culture is such an oppressing system.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like the tough thing is there's really no winning. And I have this conversation with clients a lot, especially my clients who, kind of meet the ideal, that they may be in smaller bodies.
Yeah.
Some of them are very aesthetically, very beautiful.
Yeah.
But we have discussions about like, but how long does that last? Because truly, it's like, I always say it's like holding onto sand. It's going to slip through your fingers because we're going to age.
Yeah.
And, wrapped up in the whole beauty culture is also an idolization of youth, not just thinness and beauty, but youth, and that's not something that we can control. I mean, you can buy all the eye creams and you can buy all the hair dyes and all that, but truthfully, like, we're not going to be able to hold on to that forever. We're going to get saggy and wrinkly and all kinds of things as we get older.
Have you ever listened to Jamil's podcast?
I haven't. I've seen some of her stuff on Instagram, but I haven't listened to her podcast.
You should check it out. I forget which episode. Oh no, this actually was just on her Instagram, but she's really great about this stuff. And I love it because she's a celebrity and you don't hear that often of her, like really like poking at this stuff. But she was telling, maybe on her story or something about how she looks the way that she does because of privilege. And she was really just calling it out of like having more money, being able to eat differently than a lot of people, getting adequate sleep, like being able to get like facials and all those things. And a lot of people gave her backlash for saying like, oh, she thinks she's better than us. But it was I thought so great that she called it what it was. It wasn't, she's not taking that in as I'm better. She's saying like, no, like we all would probably have different skin if we didn't have these barriers to life, because like I can get help for my mental state as well. And like the stress levels can be different because I'm able to address it. And that was just we're not like given that piece of it. It's like, it's your personal responsibility to look like this, and you better spend as much time and money as you can or else you suck.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that is frustrating, especially when we talk about that whole thing with celebrities, because, I'm not going to name names. I could, but, I have a couple celebrities, one in particular that is coming to mind right now. That's like, they build an empire off of, their bodies or their appearance, and, they start selling products. And it's just, to me, it's so disingenuous because I'm like, okay, I am a working mom with 2 kids and, family to take care of and a lot of life responsibilities and financial constraints. And, I'm very privileged compared to a lot of people in this country. So it's incredibly blind, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, to not realize that we don't have the same resources. We don't have the same access to things. We just don't, whether that's time or money or both. And that absolutely affects, well, pretty much every area of our life, but certainly our parents too.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a facial for the first time a couple of years ago, and I don't know what sparked my question, but I was just I'm so full of questions. I was asking the dermatologist all these things, and I was like, why can you always tell that someone is rich based on their skin? Because like they just look different. Like rich people's skin just looks different. And she was like, because of the money, like because they have access to all of these things that they can do differently. And it just, I don't know why I had never thought of it before that time, but that was like such an aha moment for me. It was like, I've really been talking about diet culture, but here now I have this like realizing that privilege gives this additional layer into the beauty standards and all these things. And it was just funny to hear her say that so honestly, like she can tell a difference in people's skin based on the amount of resources that they have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we know that on an intellectual level,
Right.
but it still affects how we feel about ourselves. And it's kind of like those, I don't know if you've ever seen the research they've been doing on advertising, and how even when people are presented with photoshopped and retouched images that say this image has been altered and photoshopped, it still affects their self-esteem in a negative way. So it's like we can intellectually know this isn't real, or that person has more privilege and therefore they are able to access more, and it still takes a toll on our self-esteem.
Yeah, you're right. Like it, you know it, and then the culture still affects you. It is so interesting.
I think we have to be so intentional about what we consume and what we're putting in our minds, and how we're processing what we put in our minds, being a critical consumer of media, which I don't think we do enough. I'm even more aware of that now that I have kids, and we'll be watching a commercial and I'm seeing a commercial that I wouldn't think twice about. I'm seeing it from my 6-year-old's perspective, and I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, actually, I don't want him to absorb this message, So I'm like, let's have a conversation. I mean, even again, like silly things like eye creams, or like one of them was like one of those beard touch-ups for men. You can brush away the gray slowly over time so it looks darker again. And I'm thinking, this seems really benign, but the message he's getting is it's not okay to have gray hair, which his daddy has more and more of. He's saying like women are supposed to not have bags under their eyes or wrinkles. It's like things that we take for granted are actually not that benign at all.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I used to use I have pretty dark circles. Naturally, it's 100% genetic, and I've realized this because I spent probably from the time I was like 16 to 24 trying all these different things to get rid of the bags under my eyes, and they don't go away because I don't think they're going to. And just like coming to terms with that of like I more and more, I just don't care. It's not that I don't care about how I look, but it's just like, if this is the thing that's going to define my worth, like, I don't want to be worthy, like, to those standards.
Yes, I love that. That's hard though, especially at that age. Those teenage years and preteen years are so rough when we're trying to kind of figure out our identity and how we fit into the world. And, but yeah, so this is interesting though, because have you seen, I've been meaning to go look it up, but I saw on somebody else's Instagram that they posted, apparently it's becoming trendy to have under eye circles. And so there's like all these makeup tutorials. I know. So I've been meaning to go look it up because I want to do a post about it of just like, see, this just shows you how made up all these beauty culture ideals are, that it was so arbitrary to begin with, and now it's totally reversed, right? And like, we'll see if it ever like really picks up and takes steam. It may not, but still, it just goes to show you like, this is just totally made up. It really is. And can we just please stop buying into all of these things? I mean, if you look at cultures around the world, not every culture values the same things that we do. It's very much a cultural thing.
Oh, 100%. And when you point that out, it's just so interesting to be like, this is made up. Like, all of these systems of oppression are made up. None of them actually mean anything. Like, we know we need oxygen to breathe, and we need food to live, and water. Like, we need these things. We need shelter, like those basic needs, but all this other stuff that like we just made up to make money from, basically, it's like, when you call that out, it really does lose a lot of power. It just takes, like you said, like such a long time. And I don't think I'm on any kind of high horse for having overcome it, because it's literally like day in, day out being furious about these systems and just learning more and more about them. It's actually quite exhausting, but it's better than being underneath of them.
Yes, it can be. And, it's not to say that makeup is bad or
No.
dyeing your hair is bad or any of those things. It's really comes down to, the motivation of like,
Yeah.
why are we doing it? And how do we feel about ourselves if we don't or we can't?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I totally agree. I would love to hear if you were open to sharing some of the conversations that you have with your kiddos about this stuff, because I don't have kids yet. And I think about that. Like, I want them in my future, and just wondering, like, how do you navigate the atrocity that is diet culture and beauty standards and all of these awful systems of oppression, and like helping them to not get stuck?
Yeah. Gosh, it's tough because it scares me because I feel like as much as we talk about stuff at home in the way that I want to shape those conversations, I know as they get older and they are watching more TV or they're going to school, they're going to get those messages that I have no control over. And
Yeah.
I'm always like really hoping and praying that the stuff that we're teaching them at home will stick with them. I remember the first time my son, he was probably 4 at the time, he's 6 now, made a comment about somebody's body. A lady had delivered groceries to our house, and speaking of privilege, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I think that was right after the baby was born, and that's when I started getting some groceries delivered. But she was in a larger body, and he made a comment about like, hey, that lady is fat. Why is she fat? And I was like, because, it's one of those moments that you're like, I wasn't ready for this question.
Yeah.
But my response was, because we are Christians and a lot of things go back to faith for us. I
Mhm.
said, because God made bodies come in all shapes and sizes. Isn't that cool? It would be so boring if we all looked the same. And he was like, oh, okay. And we moved on. And then I look for opportunities to kind of build on that message of pointing out that we are all different, and that's a good thing. It's great that we're not all the same color, that we are not the same height, we are not the same weight, that there's boys and girls and we're all different. We have some unique things that make us all human, but just appreciating what makes us similar and what makes us different, and approaching body diversity as a natural good thing instead of something that's a problem and we're all supposed to be thin, and anybody who doesn't fit that is somehow outside normal and there's something wrong or they're doing something wrong. And unfortunately, the Christian community is not it's not immune to diet culture, and there can be a lot of morality wrapped up in food.
I saw your post this morning about morality, or maybe it was last night, but you talked about that and I really loved that.
Yeah. And, it frustrates me when I see that in the church, just because I'm like, oh my goodness, we should be coming at this from such a different way. But again, we're all human and we're all very susceptible to predominant cultural messages, including diet culture right now.
Yeah.
So, and even just like I try to get books that have people of different ethnicities or different abilities, like maybe a kid that, is missing a leg or wears an eye patch or, whatever, and just have conversations about differences. And also like, how do you think it makes these people feel if somebody says something mean to them or stares at them or whatever, that's the therapist in me. I'm always trying to promote empathy and like putting yourself in somebody else's shoes a lot, because I feel like if you can grasp that, you're kind of set up to be a better human for life, right? If you're really empathetic and can understand other people who are different than you. So yeah, that's kind of the body thing. And then the food stuff is a whole nother thing. And that was actually pretty challenging for me, more than I expected it to be, since I was recovered. I had like a whole nother layer of my own issues with food that came up that I had to work through when it was with my kids, because there's so much pressure put on moms to be perfect moms. And that definitely applies to food right now. I mean, there's just so much judgment about like, wow, you're letting your kid eat sugar, you're letting your kid eat French fries, it's like, who's going to pack the healthiest lunch? Well, my kids had beets at lunch. It's just
Oh gosh.
hard to not get caught up in that feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm somehow not a good mom because I put chocolate chip cookies in my kid's lunchbox, or he's always asking for sugar or whatever. And so, yeah, that was like a whole nother layer for me that I had to kind of work through, which I'm grateful for, because it really brought to the surface things that I didn't realize were still there.
Yeah. I love all the things that you just said. It's like so beautiful to hear an alternative way to, or an alternate way to speak to kids about diversity. Because I think oftentimes we are like, hush, like you can't call someone fat, like that's a bad word. And I love so much how people in larger bodies are, if they choose to, using that as this is a description. It has no meaning other than that this is the size of my body. And I just think that's so empowering to be able to call it what it is without it being this almost like curse word, basically, to have someone call that out. And with like ableism too, I feel like a lot of times we are like, oh, I'm so glad that I can do things because I'm able to. And it's like, oh my gosh, like I totally get where we're coming from, but holy crap, this is the wrong way to approach that. Like that person, you shouldn't be happy that you're not these other people. Like that's not what it's about. So I love that you're teaching your kids that empathy. That's so beautiful.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And that whole, like, using the word fat is such a loaded thing with kids, because they're so concrete in the way they think when they're little like that, like when my son asked, like, why is she fat? It was like, okay. And then he accepted, like, oh, bodies are supposed to be different sizes. Okay. And he just moves on and doesn't question it. But I didn't say this earlier, but now that you brought that up, I remember I also said, just so you know, the word fat isn't bad. It's just a descriptor, being tall or whatever. I said, but we got to be really careful using it, because sometimes other people think it's bad.
Right.
It might hurt somebody's feelings if you called them fat, even though it's not bad. Sometimes people use it in a mean way. So it's like trying to, and then it's kind of like, that's where he's kind of like, huh? Like, I don't get it, because it's like trying to explain, like, don't call somebody tall.
Right.
Being not bad, but don't call them tall. It might hurt their feelings. That kind of again, those concrete thinkers, it's like, that doesn't, like, if it's not bad, why would it hurt somebody's feelings? And it just shows like how ridiculous it is, and how frustrating and how harmful it is that something that should be a neutral description of a person's body has become a loaded thing that is hurtful to say.
Yep.
And I really enjoyed reading some of the books by people who are in larger bodies, who are very fat positive and fat activists, and just like those that are saying, like, I am fat. Like, there's you don't have to pretend that I'm not, and that's why it's like, well, yeah, if somebody's in a larger body, they are fat, but it's like, we can't say that, because the word fat is supposedly an insult. When it's not, and it shouldn't be construed that way. And we just want to deny somebody's existence in a larger body. It's like, that is their experience. Whether we put that name to it or not, they're in a larger body. And by saying, like, oh, you're not fat, we're somehow in my mind, and I'm speaking from this with somebody within privilege. So this is just what I've heard and this may not even be true for all people who live in larger bodies, just the ones that I have read and listened to, they find it very invalidating to be told, like, oh, you're not fat. Like, no, I am. And also, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think that applies to a lot of things that we're so busy trying to make people feel better about themselves, because we think that those things inherently are negative, and that's what we need to change so that people can just exist, because that's never going to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. I think our solutions to this whole thing have been so backwards. It's like, when you look at weight discrimination, it's such a form of oppression. It's, I've heard it described as like the last socially acceptable form of prejudice. And it's so true. And it's like, and yet we have this big push to make people lose weight so they won't be discriminated against. And it's like, when has that ever been the answer? When has that ever been the answer to oppression and discrimination, is to tell the people who are being oppressed that they just need to change to fit the ideal, and then they'll escape the pain of being discriminated against.
I mean, I feel like that is unfortunately being encouraged in so many ways, even like in the Black Lives Matter movement. How many times have we seen like, oh, that person deserved to be shot? It's like they shouldn't have done that, and that's why they got. It's like everything about oppressed people is being blamed on them.
Yeah, and yet you see within, but see here, I guess this is where I was going with it, is like within those communities, there's much more of a push from those within the community to say like, no, that's not true. We're not going to change. Like, the problem is you as our oppressor. And that's not always true, because I think we can internalize racism, and we can internalize fat phobia, we can internalize, all kinds of things, and take the blame for how we've been mistreated. But it just seems to be way more widespread when it comes to weight discrimination, where we internalize that and we say like, oh, the problem is me. We totally buy into that message. And then we're trying to change ourselves to fit the ideal, instead of saying like, no, the problem, the reason I'm in so much pain is because of the oppression, and the oppression needs to change. But again, I mean, you're right. There is some of that still. I just started following an account. I can't remember what the handle is, but it's basically promoting like skin color diversity. And he had posted something about, it was like a picture of a skin lightening cream that you can buy. And one was in particular geared toward teens. And I was just like, oh, this is so frustrating. Like, I just don't understand. And again, I almost hesitate to even speak on this, because I'm a person in a straight sized body with white skin. I don't even understand what it's like to be the victim of that kind of discrimination. But it just makes me so mad to think that anybody's being told like their skin's too dark and they need to use these really, I can't imagine they're good for you, creams to lighten your skin. Like,
that sounds painful.
It does. And it's really sick, especially when I think about gearing that towards like basically children, teens, and getting them when they're super susceptible. Again, going back to that, like they're trying to figure out who they are and their identity and their place in the world. And it's just, I don't know. It's just maddening. I'm like, I hope we get to a place where this isn't what we're doing to each other as human beings, but sometimes it feels a little disheartening.
Yeah. I don't know if you and I will see that in our lifetimes, but we're going to keep on talking about it.
Keep fighting for it. And I feel like, I've had these conversations with clients who think, well, like, this is just really overwhelming. And I'm like, I feel that sometimes. I really do. At the same time, I remind myself, like, I didn't believe these things 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You didn't believe these things 10 years ago. And most of the people we were following on Instagram didn't believe these things 10 years ago.
Right. You're so right.
Stories. So I'm like, it's possible. It just is going to take time.
Yeah.
We can't give up. We've got to keep speaking the truth and educating people and doing our part. Like how much I am trying to raise my children to see themselves and see other people in a different way. That's where I'm like, okay, change is possible. That keeps me energized in this work for sure.
Mm-hmm. I am curious, because you brought up how in the church it can really be like a moral thing about your weight. If you would speak to that at all, because that was something that I had a really hard time with as an outpatient dietitian, specifically like hearing stories about how religion tied into a lot of people's desire to be as thin as possible. And I even had one person I worked with who shared this book with me about how like you have to be thin basically to be morally acceptable. And I just was enraged. And that's a place where I feel complete stuckness, because I'm not a therapist and at any capacity. Right. And so it's like, that spirituality is part of someone's like core existence, and they need that. And then when you tell me that your religion is actually causing this direct oppression on you in a way that I know you can't heal from without challenging that, it like makes my brain explode, because I'm like, what is someone supposed to do in that situation? Because my loud mouth would be like, you need to like put that book in the garbage, because like this isn't helping you, but that's telling someone to not follow their faith. And I'm just curious like how you would even speak to that.
Yeah, I think one of the important things is to really encourage somebody to dig deeper in, is that actually whatever your book of faith is? So like for me, that's the Bible, and I work. So I mean, I have worked with people of other faiths, but people that are Christian tend to gravitate towards me, since I offer Christian counseling specifically, in addition to just normal counseling. And so like I'll say like, what does the Bible actually say about this? And we kind of dig into the scriptures, and you cannot find a single verse that really says like you're supposed to be thin. And there are some verses that people tend to hang things on. Like there's a verse that talks about our bodies being a temple, and therefore we're supposed to take care of our bodies. And I'm like, cool. Okay. But what does that actually mean? Because that doesn't say that means being thin. And so we explore like, what does that actually mean to take care of your body? And is having an eating disorder, is restricting food, is over exercising, are those things honoring your body? Is that taking care of your temple? And just really kind of challenging these assumptions. I think that's where it's like, it's almost been like the filter of diet culture has been laid over the Bible and over Christian beliefs. And it's like, okay, that's how we're seeing it, but that's really not actually what the Bible teaches. That's not actually what God says about that. So let's take that diet culture filter off and look at it just for what it is, and see if maybe things have been manipulated a little bit or twisted in a way that that's not how they were written, and it's not how it was intended. So I find that to be really helpful. And like for clients who, aren't Christian, even still, we kind of unpack like, well, how does this line up with your faith? Like, would your higher power or whatever want you to be treating your body this way? Where you're basically abusing your body. And, sometimes, especially more acute, you've got chronic illnesses that are starting to pop up, whether that's heart, and cardiac stuff, or osteoporosis, or all these things that can get pretty severe. Does that actually line up with your faith values? And so often, once they dig a little deeper, you can find out not so much. And now I'm trying to find more resources that are more like fat positive, food freedom type. And there are some really good ones. And so I have some resources that I can share with clients and say like, hey, here's a different perspective. Try to read this book or listen to these podcasts and, get a different perspective. Again, it goes back to that. Like sometimes we don't know there's an alternate way of seeing things or thinking about things, because we're told one thing and we accept that and we go with it. And so just presenting like, hey, there's a different way of looking at this. Can just be such a pivotal point in someone's journey.
Yeah, that's so true. Like if I think back to the ways that I like doing health counseling, it's obviously you need to have the person come to their own conclusions for things to be effective. It's just like, and that it seems like so straightforward to think of it that way, but for whatever reason, that's such like a hot button for me when I hear things like that, because it's like, I don't want you to be suffering because this thing told you, and then I'm just mad at the thing. And so that's a helpful reminder for me. And I'm sure for anyone listening to hear that of like, is this actually serving you? Is this what your beliefs, does this line up with your beliefs? Because I would assume the answer is always going to be no for that. It's just, unfortunately, whatever that resource was that this person had come across, for whether it was malicious intent or just, like you said, these layers of different cultures on top of each other that like someone was making money off of that, it's like, that's so unfortunate to come across that, but that exists in so many different arenas.
Yeah, it really does. when those messages are loud and predominant, it's hard to not be affected by it. And I think you're going to be, unless you are intentional about not being, because that's just how our brains work. We kind of accept things that we hear over and over and over, we see over and over. It starts to think like that's the norm or that's the truth. So again, going back to why it's really important that we kind of curate our lives, so that whether it's social media, the people that we're around, and that's true beyond just like food and body stuff, like who we're around, what we surround ourselves with, and what we take in greatly affects how we feel about ourselves and the world and our mental health and all of those things.
Oh, I love that so much. I wanted to ask what advice you would give someone that's trying to leave diet culture behind. And I feel like a theme you've had throughout this whole interview, which I love so much, is just being intentional about how you, sort of like what messages you surround yourself with. Is there anything else you would say, or is that kind of which is lovely. There doesn't have to be anything more. I just wanted to give you a chance to say that.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm biased because I'm doing this work, but I think it can also be really helpful to seek out some support one-on-one to have help like going through that on a personal level. And so whether that's a therapist, a coach, or a dietitian, or some mix thereof. And now actually there's so many like good group programs that are going on related to food and body stuff, but just being able to dig in deeper on a personal level, because it's one thing to read about all of these things and understand the concepts and understand the theories and all of that, but applying that on a day-to-day basis, that can be tough, and like we were saying earlier, it's a process. It doesn't happen quickly. I wish just knowing information was enough for us to change, but we're not just intellectual beings, right?
Right.
So we have the emotions and the spirit and the body and all of those things. And so it definitely is a process. And I think it's hard to do that alone sometimes. I mean, people can certainly, but I think for most people, having somebody to kind of walk that with you and help you apply it in a personal way and unpack things and kind of point things out and challenge that, be that person that's like, but is that true? Or, you know what I'm saying? That kind of accountability and almost like a mirror.
Yeah.
Because we take a lot of things for granted that we think we know. And so having somebody there be like, but is it really, or what about this? I think that can be really invaluable.
Yeah. Cause that's like one of my favorite things to say when people ask like what they need to do. I'm like, go to a therapist, find a therapist you trust, because you're going to need it to unpack this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I always say food and body stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's usually a lot of layers to it. Sometimes there's a trauma. A lot of times there's trauma that sometimes we're not even aware of, or we kind of minimize, like, oh, that wasn't a big deal. We don't realize how much it really did affect us. And so, yeah, having somebody that can help you unpack and process all of that can really be instrumental into that whole freedom. Again, like I use freedom in a big context of not just food and body stuff, but just freedom in general. So yeah.
Do you have anything that you want to plug or promote? I'll put your links, your Instagram handle, your website, all that stuff in the show notes of this episode. But if there's anything else you wanted to speak to, I'll give you a second for that.
Oh, well, thank you. I actually am just launching a body image resilience program. So I don't know when this will air. It's launching May 18th. It may air after that. And if it does, then people can sign up on the website for the wait list for the next one. We'll certainly do it again. But I'm really excited about it. I don't know if you're familiar with the book More Than a Body.
I don't think I know that one.
So there are two sisters, the Kite sisters. They both have PhDs and I think it's like women's and social media studies, something along those lines. But they ended up years ago starting a nonprofit called Beauty Redefined. And then they recently, I think just earlier this year, came out with a book called More Than a Body. And I just loved it so much. And I went online to their website and saw that they have a curriculum. And I was like, yes, I want to share this and do it. So it's like a group program. There's 10 weeks where they have online videos that participants will watch. And then we meet together weekly There's a student workbook that they work through and all that. But the whole thing is really just going through a process of disconnecting your value, your worth, your identity from your appearance. That's kind of their whole thing, is that, this whole like everybody is beautiful thing is great. And that may be really helpful for some, but for a lot of us, it just still kind of falls flat because it keeps the focus on our appearance and our beauty. And that really, we're more than that. And it doesn't really matter whether we're beautiful or not, because that's not what we have to offer the world. And that's not our purpose. And so I really resonated with that. So that's why I'm like, I love this. So like I said, I'm launching that group and I'm really excited about it. So that's what's new. I also have a new coach that I just hired that I absolutely adore. She's so great. She has her own history of recovering from diet culture, and I think she's just going to be wonderful. She actually has her own podcast, Building Better Humans podcast. So she's very passionate about this work. And, so yeah, I'm excited now because I'm full. And so I get to the point where I'm like, I don't have space for you. So I am very happy that I was able to hire somebody that I trust so much and think so highly of, to work with clients on my diet. Yeah.
Congratulations on being able to expand and know that you don't have to tell people adios, I can't help you right now. Like that must feel better too, to be able to continue your outreach.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, from a business standpoint, I'm like, well, that's great. But from like a standpoint of like, I got into this business to help people. And when I'm not able to help people, that stinks.
Yeah.
Because I'm still only working part-time because I'm at home with my daughter. She's 2.
Okay.
And it's like, it's such this tension because I love my job, but I also really love being with her. And unless God has other plans, she's my last.
Okay.
I just want to enjoy that time with her and soak her up because it really does go by so fast. My other one now, I'm like, wait, how did this happen? So I know it'll go by fast. So as much as I love my job, and sometimes I think, if I worked the other days of the week, I could see more clients. I'm like, yeah, but I don't think I'll ever look back and regret spending the time with my daughter, my little velociraptor, as we call her. She is quite feisty and she's a handful, but she's fun.
That's amazing. I'm glad you're doing that. And the course that you just described, I was feeling like emotional in a positive way of like, that sounds so like cathartic, and to be able to, like you said, separate yourself and what your actual values are, because beauty is not a value. I would stretch to say, I know it has become one, but it's not actually a real value. So that's so lovely.
I think we believe it is. It feels like it is. We feel that in a deep way, but usually when I start unpacking with clients, it's really our value is more connection with other people and wanting to feel okay with ourselves and feel valued. It's just that in our culture, that seems like a really tangible way to achieve those things is by being thin and beautiful and young, all these things. And so once we start unpacking, like, what is it that you're actually needing? What are those needs? And can those needs be met in other ways besides trying to manipulate your body, 24/7? It can be scary. I'm not gonna lie, it can be kind of scary to think about letting that go, but it also can be kind of exciting, like realizing there may be these whole other parts of yourself or your life that haven't even really been explored or nurtured because you've been pouring all that time and energy into your appearance and your body.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Love it. Love it so much.
Yeah.
Cherie, this has been so great. I have loved talking with you this morning and just the things that you're sharing. I want to appreciate, and I love interviewing because everyone can articulate and offer their own kind of spin on something, and it's invaluable. So thank you so much for being here and talking with me today. I'm glad we were able to connect.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much for asking me. And I'd love to come back anytime. So let me know. I could do this all day long. As you can tell, I'm super passionate about it. So
yes.
We didn't even get to all the diet culture stuff I thought we were going to talk about. So, yeah. we could do a whole nother thing on that.
Yes, I agree.
Definitely do a whole episode on diet culture alone, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. This is why, like, when I have certain questions, but this is what I love about these conversations, just kind of letting them happen naturally, because sometimes things come up and it's like, ooh, like I have some things I did want to discuss, but this is more like in the moment. I want to make sure we like can hash this out and like have this conversation. So I agree. I think we probably need to revisit. So that would be fun to schedule in the future.
That'd be great. Well, I think organic is always the best way to go. So
yes,
I'm glad it turned out the way that it did. And like I said, it was really nice to get to know you. So thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it.
yes. The feeling is so mutual. Okay, well, you take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Diet Culture is co-produced by myself and my brother, Nick Lewis. You can keep up with what's going on with Diet Culture on my Instagram page at Dietitian Dani Cast. If you prefer to watch rather than just listen, check us out on YouTube, and we always love ratings and reviews if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for your support, and can't wait to talk to you next week.